The booster products are a nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and sulphur solution to nutrients being applied typically in late winter and spring. The decision around what booster product you're going to use is typically dictated to by three key points. The first one being nitrogen rate. We want to apply nitrogen at our 25 kilograms of N per hectare minimum up to our maximum of 60 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So the second consideration would be whether you apply the booster to supplement some phosphorus and potassium and sulphur that gets removed with hay or silage. The third consideration would be, when you're considering a booster, would be whether you need to apply some additional nutrients to the paddock. So if your critical soil test values are below where they need to be, then you might consider a booster that has a higher concentration or a higher percentage of phosphorus and potassium that can actually get some capital value in that application. To maximise pasture response, we've got to make sure that our base nutrients are in adequate supply. Phosphorus and potassium are key drivers for pasture production, and having those in adequate levels will make sure that we get the maximum response from our applied nitrogen. There's two key considerations around rate of nutrient application. The first one is replacing those nutrients, and if we're not replacing the nutrients that are removed from the pasture, then we're drawing down those nutrient levels, and therefore responses to pasture growth are going to be a lot less. And secondly, if we start at a point where our soil test values are below the critical values on where they need to be, and in particular phosphorus, sulphur and potassium, then we're not going to see those pasture growth rates and the response to the applied nitrogen that we hope for in spring. Management practices on farms have a bearing on nutrient loads across the farm. There's a lot of nutrients contained in hay that is removed from the paddock, and those nutrients have got to come from somewhere. So obviously the soil can give up a certain amount, but it's not an endless supply that the soil can give up. It's got to be supplemented through fertiliser applications, and the boosters offer that opportunity to supply nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and sulphur in ratios that may be varied depending on the situation. Pasture booster is higher in nitrogen analysis compared to its phosphorus and potassium percentage. So when we apply pasture booster, we're getting less P and K. So that would be in a situation where we're just looking at paddocks that maybe are closer to the dairy or that have pretty good P and K levels. So we're just looking really at small maintenance applications. Grass booster is basically nitrogen and sulphur alone. So in those situations, we're looking at only grass-only pastures with some clover in them. They will tend to be closer to the dairy, or they'll be in broadacre, extensive pasture situations. They'll tend to be areas that have a higher P and higher K value, and we're only really looking at maintenance or supplementing nitrogen and sulphur in there. So Greentop and Greentop K are nitrogen-based products that offer either phosphorus or potassium and sulphur as accompanying nutrients. So Greentop might be used in situations where we need to top up our phosphorus levels a little bit, and Greentop K is where our phosphorus levels may be adequate, and we're just looking at a fodder conservation situation where we're replacing some of that potassium we're putting in the silage or in the hay.